Welcome to my channel. Subscribe, listen, and enjoy my stories every day. The evening had settled with a silence that felt heavier than usual in the small, well-kept living room where Michael sat, scrolling aimlessly through the TV channels. His mind wasn't really on the screen. It was Mary, his wife of 5 years, who occupied his thoughts, her recent late nights at the office, the missed dinners, and the all-too-frequent excuses that seemed to roll off her tongue with practiced ease. A pang of suspicion led him to do something he had never considered before. The house was quiet, eerily so, with Mary supposedly at another last-minute business meeting. Michael's gaze fell on her sleek, black smartphone, casually left on the coffee table. His heart raced as he deliberated, but the gnawing doubt in his mind overpowered his respect for her privacy. He picked up the phone. The device unlocked with the familiar code unchanged since the day she had proudly told him, "It's the date we met, so I never forget." A bitter smile touched his lips as he navigated to the call log. What he saw next tightened his chest, a number, unrecognized and frequently dialed, most often when he was working late. With trembling hands, he keyed the mysterious number into his own phone and pressed call. The line trilled only once before a voice answered, a voice distinctly male and brimming with confusion. "Hello?" Michael's voice was a controlled calm that belied his inner turmoil. "Who am I speaking to?" "My name is Michael, and this is my wife Mary's phone. You've been calling each other a lot." There was a pause, a stutter. I didn't know she was married," the man confessed, his voice a mixture of surprise and guilt. Michael felt the room spin as the words sank in. The betrayal sliced through his heart with a pain sharper than he had ever known. "Yeah, well, she is. Or was, should I say." The conversation that followed was a blur of apologies and confessions from the other end, but Michael hardly heard them. His mind raced with images of Mary, her lies embedding themselves like thorns in his heart. As the call ended, a cold clarity settled over him. The love he had nurtured turned to ashes, fueling a fiery resolve. Revenge, a word he had never associated with himself, now pulsed through his veins like a promise. The next days were a whirlwind. Papers were served, confrontations ensued, and the facade of a happy marriage crumbled. Mary's tears and pleas for forgiveness fell on deaf ears, his heart had hardened. With the divorce finalized, Michael stood outside the courthouse, a free man in the eyes of the law but bound by the chains of betrayal. He knew that from this day forward, their paths would never cross again. Mary had chosen her fate, and he, in turn, chose solitude over deceit. As he walked away, the crisp air seemed to whisper possibilities of new beginnings. But first, he had plans to settle, the score, the pain, and the future. His revenge had only just begun. Michael's newfound freedom was tainted with bitterness as he navigated his now solitary life. The empty spaces of his home echoed back to him the remnants of Mary's presence. He knew he couldn't move on until he settled the turmoil within him, until he had his revenge. One chilly evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Michael sat at his kitchen table, a notebook open before him. He was meticulously planning every detail, his mind sharp, his resolve unwavering. The man who had unknowingly intruded into his marriage, John, he had learned from their previous conversation, would be his first target. Not with violence, but with a strike to his reputation. Michael set up a fake email account, his fingers steady as he typed. He crafted emails to John's employer, posing as a concerned client alleging misconduct. With each click, a piece of his anger channeled into the digital world, setting the first domino. As he hit send, his phone buzzed, a message from Mary. Ignoring it, Michael's thoughts were already on his next move. He knew that John frequented a local bar on Friday nights, a perfect public venue for the next part of his plan. Friday arrived swiftly, and with it, a stormy evening. Michael dressed in nondescript dark clothing, his heart pounding in his chest as he drove to the bar. He could see John through the fogged windows, laughing at a table with friends. Michael entered, unnoticed, and found a spot at the back with a clear view. He waited, watching, as John enjoyed his night, oblivious to the ruin about to befall him. With a deep breath, Michael approached the bartender, slipping him a note and $100 bill. "Make sure he gets this directly, please," he instructed quietly. The bartender nodded, pocketing the bill and handing John the note a few minutes later. Michael watched John's expression shift from amusement to confusion to dread as he read the contents, photos of John and Mary, and a message that left no doubt about her marital status. John's evening unraveled quickly. His friends' questioning glances turned to judgment as he tried to explain, his words tripping over his shock. Michael savored the moment from the shadows, the first taste of his revenge sweet and satisfying. As he left the bar, the cold air felt invigorating against his skin. Michael knew this was only the beginning. Each step he took was a step further from his past life with Mary and a step deeper into his crusade of retribution. Driving home, his phone buzzed incessantly, messages and calls lighting up the screen. He glanced at it, seeing Mary's name flash repeatedly. With a smirk, he turned the phone off and tossed it onto the passenger seat. Tonight was about reclaiming his power, and he felt the scales of justice tilting back in his favor, if only just slightly. As the city lights blurred past, Michael's mind raced with further plans. His heart was still wounded, but every action he took stitched a piece of his dignity back together. Revenge, he realized, was a journey, and he was just at the beginning. The fallout of Michael's initial acts of revenge had begun to ripple outward, but he felt no satisfaction, only a deeper call to action. As he sat in his dimly lit living room, the glow from his laptop illuminating his determined face, he planned his next move. Michael knew that simply ruining John's reputation wasn't enough. He needed to dismantle the illusions Mary had built around her secret life. With meticulous precision, he gathered information on Mary's social circles, her professional networks, and any mutual friends who still sided with her. It was time for the truth to surface, not just about her affair but about the lies that had enabled it. On a cold, breezy afternoon, Michael crafted a series of messages, each tailored to strike a chord with the recipient. He attached the same photos he had used to confront John, now sending them to a broader audience with a note. "I thought you should know who Mary really is. This is the truth she hid from us all." He pressed send, and as each message flew into the digital ether, a sense of grim determination settled over him. It wasn't long before the responses began to trickle in, shock, disbelief, and even some who expressed sympathy for him. Michael watched as his phone lit up with notifications, but he ignored most, focusing on the broader impact of his actions. That evening, as Michael was about to close his laptop, a knock came at his door. He hesitated, a flicker of apprehension crossing his mind before he moved to answer. Standing on his doorstep was Helen, a close friend who had known both him and Mary for years. "Michael, we need to talk," Helen said, her voice a mixture of concern and reproach. She brushed past him into the living room, her eyes searching his face for answers. "Helen, I'm sorry for bringing you into this mess, but you deserve to know the truth," Michael began, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. Helen sighed, sitting down heavily on the sofa. "I got your message. Is this why you've been so distant?" "Michael, this isn't you. What are you trying to achieve with all this?" "Revenge," he wanted to say, but instead, he met her gaze, his resolve hardening. "I want her to feel a fraction of the pain she's caused me. I want everyone to see her for who she truly is." Helen shook her head, her expression softening. "And what about you, Michael? What happens to you in all this? Revenge won't heal you, it might even destroy you." But Michael was too far gone to heed her warning. "It's already done, Helen. There's no turning back now." She reached out, placing a hand on his arm. "There is always a choice, Michael. Don't let this poison you." You're better than this. Michael looked away, conflicts between his need for vengeance and the remnants of the man he used to be. I have to finish what I started, he said quietly, almost to himself. Helen stood, her disappointment palpable. I hope you find peace in all this, Michael. I really do. With those parting words, she left, the door closing softly behind her. Alone again, Michael felt the weight of his actions more acutely than ever. Yet, the path he had chosen seemed to offer the only semblance of relief from his pain. As he resumed his work, focusing on the next phase of his plan, the night grew darker around him, mirroring the shadow that had fallen over his life. The quest for retribution was far from over, and Michael was ready to see it through, no matter the cost. As dawn broke over the city, Michael sat at his kitchen table, the last pieces of his plan laid out before him. His actions thus far had shaken the foundations of Mary's world, but he intended his final act to be the most devastating. Today, he would expose her deception in a manner so public, so undeniable, that she would never recover. The opportunity presented itself at a major industry conference where Mary was scheduled to speak. Michael had managed to secure a spot in the technical crew through a contact who was unaware of his motives. Disguised by the anonymity of a crew member, he infiltrated the event with a singular focus. As Mary took the stage, greeted by applause, Michael positioned himself near the audiovisual controls. His fingers hovered over the tablet that controlled the presentations, loaded with the incriminating photos and messages Mary had so carelessly left in her wake. Mary began her speech, confident and poised as she addressed the crowd. Her words were about trust and partnership in the business world, a bitter irony not lost on Michael. As she reached the climax of her speech, Michael's hand slid to the tablet, and with a swipe, he replaced her corporate slides with the images of her betrayal. The reaction was immediate. The crowd gasped, whispers turning into shouts as the content of the images sank in. Mary's eyes widened in horror as she turned towards the screen, her professional facade crumbling in real time. She tried to speak, to explain, but her voice was drowned out by the chaos. Michael watched from the shadows, his heart pounding with a mix of triumph and pain. This was the moment he had been craving, the moment of her utter humiliation. As Mary fled the stage, Michael made his way outside, his part played to its bitter end. He could hear the commotion inside as the event descended into disarray, but he was already moving on, his revenge complete. Later that evening, as Michael sat alone in his darkened living room, the doorbell rang. He opened the door to find not Mary, but John, the man from the affair, his face a mask of anger and desperation. "You've destroyed everything," John accused, stepping into the light of the hallway. "Not just her life, but mine. Was it worth it?" Michael's gaze was unwavering. "She destroyed my life first. I just returned the favor." John shook his head, his voice lowering to a menacing whisper. "You think you've won, but you've lost everything, Michael. Look at you, alone in this hate." There was truth in John's words, a truth that gnawed at Michael's resolve. Yet, he could not muster the regret John seemed to expect. "Maybe," Michael conceded, his voice cold. "But she's lost more." With those final words, John turned and left, the sound of his footsteps echoing down the hallway, a somber reminder of the solitude Michael had chosen. In the silence that followed, Michael realized the full extent of his actions. He had sought revenge and found it, but at the cost of his own peace. The shadows of his living room felt deeper, the silence not solitude but isolation. As the days turned into weeks, Michael's victory felt increasingly hollow. He had envisioned a sense of justice, of closure, but was left only with the bitter aftertaste of his own ruthlessness. Mary and John, forever scarred by his actions, had vanished from his life, leaving behind a void filled only by the echoes of his vengeance. In his quest to punish betrayal, Michael had become the architect of his own desolation, a poignant irony that would haunt him long after the memories of Mary had faded into the shadows of his vengeful heart.